Assalamu alaikum rahmatullah. Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Oak Tree Institute podcast. We're very honored and humbled to have an amazing guest with us today, a leadership expert, someone who's been in the leadership space, particularly in the education space for a long time, Brother William Webb. Brother William White. Welcome, Brother William. Assalamu alaikum. How are you doing?
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah. How are you doing?
I'm doing very well. How are you holding up? How's things going on in this pandemic world and the education space? How are y'all doing?
Well, I'd say it's probably like for everyone else. We're all trying to adapt and we're all trying to do things we've never done before. It's tough, but alhamdulillah, I think that if we have the right attitude, well, it's tough to have that right attitude all the time. Then I think that we can really benefit, grow, and learn a lot once this does pass, inshallah.
Mashallah, may Allah reward y'all. It's really tough lifting these days. I mean, you're an Islamic school principal. You've been doing a lot of consulting and training and helping Islamic schools for a long time. Have y'all ever been through a time like this where you've seen, whether yourself or others, like the challenges of the school administration, how to lead an institution? Like, have you ever any time come close to the kind of the paradigm or the world that we're in now?
In short, no, I haven't. I appreciate the generous characterization of my experience in Islamic schools. It hasn't been as long as many of the people that have been in our community, but during the time that I've been working in schools, I've never seen anything like that. Of course, being a principal now, this is my sixth year as a principal at the school where I am. Nothing is ever easy, so there's always a lot of challenge because you're always I really think that people should always be kind of doing something that's a little bit harder than what your skills are at. So you're having to grow and you're having to deal and you're having to learn a lot of things. So yeah, I would say that in the past years, there hasn't been a pandemic, but it's been pretty challenging dealing with so many new things. However, this year is really unlike anything else. I think most people in being in education, and there are many in our community, mashallah, 30 plus years. For me, I've been working in schools for closer to 10. But I would say that the pandemic is really forcing us to have to think deeply about every single thing that we are doing. And I think by doing that, it's helping us center on the why we exist. And really, for in Islamic schools, we have a really unique vision and purpose in all of this. So it allows us, I think, to differentiate ourselves from other schools. And it also allows us to really start thinking, do we need to keep doing this? Right? Last year we did it like this, but you know what? Now we might have a good reason to rethink X, Y, or Z. And I think that's kind of the exciting part about this. It's definitely a challenge. It's very stressful, but it's one of those leadership challenges where I think we're all going to grow in the end.
Yeah. I think whether people like it or not, they're gonna. Yeah, everybody's. I mean, you've had to become more agile. You've had to definitely. I think we were talking earlier. People have had to become more resilient teachers and students. So definitely, kind of, it's been forced upon us. But I think, alhamdulillah, many parts of our community and many parts of our society have really lived up to the challenge. So I really wanted to discuss or dive into, that first piece around your journey. You're an Islamic school principal. You're a principal of a institution. You're a certified leadership coach and facilitator. How did you get here? What is the story of William White, and what is your journey like? Tell us a little bit about it.
Sure. So, briefly beginning with the end, right? Right now, what I'm doing is I'm a principal at the Islamic School of Louisville in Louisville, Kentucky. I'm really born in Pennsylvania, but I've lived almost my whole life close to Kentucky and Indiana area, so the city of Louisville. But I've kind of had all these experiences in my life that have pulled me away, but brought me back here. And I think, subhanAllah, looking back at it, I kind of see that there's a purpose behind everything that did happen. So in addition to being a principal now, I'm also a board member in the Council of Islamic Schools in North America, CISNA. And as you mentioned, I also do leadership facilitation and coaching. How did I get to this point? So, for me, I was born in Pennsylvania. My name is William. I wasn't born as a Muslim per se, as I am now. I started off by, growing up the typical life here, living the typical American life. I went through high school, I started getting interested in languages. So I started learning Spanish, and I got really fascinated by cultures and languages. That led me into to my undergrad, which I did in Spanish, and that allowed me to travel to Mexico, Spain. And when I went to graduate school, I started getting interested in education and teaching languages, and that kind of led me to Arabic. And I was in graduate program, and I was supposed to take another foreign language. And I was going to take what most Spanish majors would have focused on, which would have been French or Italian or some Portuguese, something more similar. But it turned out to be that none of those languages fit my schedule. I couldn't make it work. So not even Chinese, not even Japanese. The last thing I was thinking about was Arabic. And I saw Arabic on the list, and subhanAllah, like it fit into my schedule. So I thought, yeah, I'll give it a try. And there was a guy in an office next to me. I was a graduate student at that time. His name was Muhammad Ibrahim from Tanta, Egypt. And I walked over to him and said, show me some of this Arabic stuff. Like he's teaching here on a Fulbright scholarship. So he opens up his, Arabic 101 book and starts pointing through, and I'm pronouncing the letters. He says, mashallah, it's good. You should take the class. I said, okay, why not? Let's try it. So I took the class, and I got really interested in it. I started diving into the language and listening to it all the time. It's the kind of my personality. When I get hooked on something, I really want to get into it. I really want to understand how to do it and do it as best as I can. So I ended up traveling to Morocco over a summer. And then after that, I graduated and had an opportunity to teach abroad. And one of the only places I could find was in Egypt. And so I went to Egypt. I arrived in Egypt in Ramadan, and I had purchased a Quran before that because I know, language is not just the words, the vocabulary, it's the culture. So I knew a little bit about Islam, but what your typical person growing up in Kentucky would know about Islam, and so I started diving deeper. I started reading, and I thought, I heard that people read the Quran and during Ramadan. So I got my English one, and I made a point of, reading it while I was waiting for the school year to start there. I became a teacher there in an American school. So after setting up my classroom, I'd read and I'd read and I'd read, and I'd walk by at night. I'd see people praying Tarawih, and then I don't know, something just started to click. And I said, wow, this is what I was looking for. There's something here. It just drew me to it. So not long after that, I ended up saying Shahada in Al-Azhar in Cairo. And after that, I, became Muslim. And after that, I got married. My wife is Egyptian. My first son was born. His name is Sufyan in Egypt. So he's Egyptian and American. We moved back here to the United States. That was an interesting time. If you wanted to ask me one time in my life I lived to similar to COVID, that would be during the Egyptian Revolution. So that happened a few months after I was there, and I lived through it for about a couple years there. And that was really interesting to see, what happened. Schools got closed there. So there was a similar sort of situation I didn't mention earlier. So I moved back to the United States. I started teaching at the university level here in the University of Louisville. And my son started coming to the school, the Islamic School of Louisville, and he was in preschool. I got involved with the school, and when I was in Egypt, I had been a teacher, and I taught college kids and I taught elementary kids and some middle school. And all of a sudden, they saw me because I had experience with accreditation, and they said, "Oh, you know something, and you can help us." And so I kind of got thrown into a meeting one time, and they said, "Okay, you come and just listen to this meeting." And all of a sudden, the person turned to me and said, "Okay, William, go ahead and lead the meeting." I said, "What? Like lead the meeting? I thought I was here just to listen." So they kind of threw me into it, and I just kind of did my best. And then the principal retired, and they kind of said, "You need to take this job." And I thought, there's no way, I'm just a teacher. I can't do that, which now saying just a teacher is a terrible, turn of phrase. I mean, being a teacher is incredibly tough, but that's the mindset I had of like, well, that leadership thing, that's not me. In high school, I was voted the most bashful of my senior class. Mm-hmm. The most bashful person's not a leader. They don't do that. That's the guy that was, standing up and giving the speeches and everything. I don't want to speak in front of a crowd. So I ended up, thought about it, praised Istikhara, and I just felt kind of being pushed into this space. So I started, being a principal here, and first big challenge was going through accreditation. Alhamdulillah, we were able to bring people together. And since then, I just started becoming more, following what's going on in the national Islamic schools. And I got interested in leadership because I started seeing what I could learn. And I just read and read and read. Went to a workshop, something with a model called the Leadership Challenge, in this particular book here. And I attended a workshop, and basically what the authors were saying it's made something in my life connect. It was like what they're saying about what exemplary leaders do. There's 5 practices. And then I said, that's what Islam says. That's what attracted me to Islam. Like an exemplary leader models the way. He does what he says he's going to do. He inspires, a shared vision. He challenges the process. He enables others. He encourages the heart. All of that just connected. And so I got involved in that in leadership, and that's what led me to present in like the ISNA Education Forum, and that kind of led me to become a board member in CISNA, and that's kind of how I got, in summary, to where I am. Alhamdulillah,
What an amazing story. MashaAllah. I mean, the coincidence, subhanAllah, it's qadar, of course, Allah has it written, but the coincidence of not fitting a class into a schedule, then the coincidence of, subhanAllah, a school that's in need of a leader. Very, very, subhanAllah, an amazing journey. May Allah bless you and bless your efforts and bless the entire journey and accept from you. What has been, so in that entire, I think it's best maybe to preface it and saying, like, obviously, after you became Muslim, and then obviously you came into the community from, in this perspective, from from that paradigm of being a part of an institution. What have been the biggest learning? What's been the biggest learning curve? Right, I'm sure there's so many challenges you can discuss, but what has been the thing that you've learned the most about our community, organizations, how we function overall, and how you've experienced that?
Well, that's a great question. So, I came into the community around the same time that I was coming into leadership, or, actually acting as a leader more and more. What I noticed, and maybe I notice it more in hindsight now that I've learned more and had time to think about it, but I think what you notice, and there are pros and cons to everything, but what I've noticed is that Muslim organizations, especially if you're in cities that are smaller, like Louisville, Kentucky, if you compared it to New Jersey or Dallas, but even those places are relatively young compared to other religious communities in the United States, whether that be the Jewish community, the Catholic community, or other Christian, faiths. So you would see that it's very interesting because the community here is made up of people who travel from all different countries. There's no Muslim community or Muslim monolithic sort of culture. You have people coming from India, Pakistan, Syria, all over the world, in Africa, Europe, coming together, right, blending those cultures and mixing that from back home, and then living in an environment that is Western, right, which sometimes conflicts with that. So I think that one of the challenges has been that I think we see in communities generally is that there's this huge desire to help and to grow, but also finding people that are willing to be patient, to realize that it's real, to do things for the real long term, you have to build it slowly, right? And you have to get that foundation. And that foundation, really, it takes a lot of time to think about what your mission or vision statement is. A lot of people want to just start knocking down start getting the hammer out and building, the school or the masjid, but, really taking time to think about that. So I think the communities are young, they're growing fast. It's exciting to see. I think that there's so much potential for our Muslim communities 10, 15, 20 years down the road. And it's really going to evolve a lot, or it's going to be based a lot on leadership and the way that our community thinks about leadership.
Yeah, I love that. I would love for you to expound on the idea of what that foundation is. So when there's so many institutions growing, so many communities blossoming all over the country, what do you think is missing from that foundational piece for an institution or a community before they start? Do you consider them the same? Is it like an organization versus a community? Do they both need a mission and vision, or is it something that is, people are not thinking about from a foundational perspective?
Well, I think that, the community needs organizations, right? So there's a community, if we think of a community as a group of people coming together with something in common with each other. And then they tend to create organizations that reflect the needs of that particular community. And I think that in many cases that the community has an idea of what they want. We want a mosque. We want a school, right? And there are people who have this idea. We want a school, we want a place where our kids can go and learn their deen. But I think sometimes the tendency, and there are visionary people in our community, lots of them, mashallah, they've done amazing things. But there's a tendency to sometimes not always take that one person's vision can dominate, right? And so one person's vision is we're going to do this, and that person may move on. And then what ends up happening is that organization builds up and it becomes more about what we're doing than why we're doing it. So you get a lot more of this, like, well, we are a school and we need to have an after school program and we need to have a gym because schools have gyms, and we need to have this AP program because schools have it. And sometimes when that happens with that growth, you move away from what that why was. And sometimes in our community, as I mentioned, people coming from other countries, they want to preserve the religion, but obviously there's sometimes conflicts between people in that community wanting to go to different schools. So the competition is a secular private school or a public school. And all of a sudden, the Islamic school starts to compete with that, but sometimes can try to just grasp at all those things that they do, but lose sight of what that main foundation is. So you become essentially let's call it a school with Muslims rather than an Islamic school. And that's always the challenge that we're all facing, because we're always hearing, well, that school down the road is doing this and this.
Yeah, yeah, no, I love that. So that's a great, and you're, I think this is going to be opening us up into areas. I know you're very passionate about the topic of leadership and how our community learns about it and embraces it. So let's dive into that. Many organizations, through our experiences, I'm sure we've seen, they're very one person centric. Whether it's a community center or an Islamic school, they're very reliant on that leader, as you mentioned. And then when the leader goes away, there's something missing, right? All the time. What are institutions supposed to do about that, right? How do we resolve that? Very much. Sometimes it's one person, maybe sometimes it's a group of people. But how do we move from being very person centric, like one person, Superman, Superwoman, to more institutional work?
Well, I think it has a lot to do, and this is my own, opinion on it. This comes from, I think, a common misconception about what leadership is. So a lot of times you will find schools that are saying, we just need a good principal and everything will be fine, right? We just need this one person who's got this great resume who goes and turns things around and comes in and we'll be fine. And it's not just schools, Islamic schools. Every school, organizations, big companies do this kind of thing. But the challenge is it's a tendency to think about leadership as a position, right? There's a difference between a capital L leader and a lowercase l. The capital L is the CEO, the principal, the board, head of the board. And then there's lowercase l, which is leaders who don't have that title, but they're acting the way that leaders do. So it's really, I think we needed more and more of a paradigm shift from a leadership is more of a position in a one person kind of thing that tells people what to do, from developing a whole culture of leaders. So if you have a whole school full of people, students, teachers, parents, everyone sees themselves as a leader, not conflicting with each other, not in a way that it's fighting. It's more the idea that everyone feels that they have ownership. Everyone feels like they should work together to build that. And I think that that's, for me, what makes me passionate about this is that it's my own experience in life was going from, I'm not a leader, I'm the bashful, maybe I'll be a teacher, but leave me in a room with kids. Don't put me in front of a lot of other people. I think from the grace of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala being pushed into this and then kind of seeing these connections with what research says, in the book that I referenced, the Leadership Challenge, that's what they talk about. It's nearly all their research in 35 years. It's leadership is an identifiable set of behaviors that can be learned. And I think that some people start off more confident as leaders, you're right. Some people may be more comfortable riding a bike in the beginning, and we're not all going to be Lance Armstrong, but we all can develop those skills that if we're all pushing these behaviors, we're going to be all encouraging each other. We're all going to get a lot farther. Then what happens when that leader eventually, moves on for whatever reason, there are other people that can come up as part of that culture. And if you look at some some corporations like GE is one of them, that's a big thing that they do. They some of these companies that are really successful, they only promote from within, right? So they're constantly grooming all those other leaders. So if we start thinking in that term, we won't be susceptible to the leadership, dilemma of that one principal that was awesome, and then when he or she left, everything fell apart.
Yeah, I love that. So I'm excited to get into the depth of like the habits of leaders and what is excellence from a leadership perspective. I want to ask you about that point a little bit though. I think a lot of times organizations, when we work with them, you're in one, I'm in one, we've worked with so many, the leaders, the people in position, they're always putting out fires, right? It's always crisis mode, managing the building, managing the organization, managing the stuff, like, crisis mode. And I feel like there's this sense of spirit of not cultivating leaders around them. So I think there's, that even into organizations that have that one, figure or superstar, that superstar is generally too busy to build the next person or to help the next person. What advice do you have on that? Like, how should organizations think about grooming, right, leaders? How does that actually get done?
Yeah, I can reference several authors. One of them I like, Stephen Covey. I'm sure you're familiar with. He in the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People talks about this kind of time quadrant, right? And either how urgent or how important something is. And I like the way he explains this, because what ends up happening is that there are many things in life that are important, but they are not urgent. So, for example, me going to a workshop to improve my leadership skills, that's important, but it's not urgent, right? What is me, for example, eating really healthy food? That is important, but it's not urgent. If I just, for weeks and the next months just eat, garbage, and I don't take care of myself and I'm feeling a little bit, this is going to be, it's important, but it's not urgent. But when I have to go to the hospital, la qadr Allah, because I have trouble breathing and I'm having a heart issue because I wasn't taking care of my health, now it becomes important and urgent. And I think you could think of that as sort of an analogy, right, for how oftentimes we are functioning as leaders in schools, is that, yes, we know we should be developing other people. And yeah, I know there should be a succession plan, but there's 3 angry parents outside my door right now, and I don't have time to think about it. But sometimes, in that example, what if we had taken a little bit of extra time to, maybe have a way to communicate with those parents and to be more proactive? And I'm not saying I do this 100% of the time, because we're all humans and there's challenges out there. But if we had taken the time to see ahead that, we knew that these parents are going to be upset, we should have probably contacted them beforehand. We wouldn't have them outside our door. So I think that's part of the issue, is starting to think more long term instead of what's just in front of us. Because, I did a leadership workshop just a week or 2 ago, and we got some great leaders that came. But there were a lot of people outside of our community who we had invited, but they're like, I just don't have time for it right now. I'm overwhelmed. Those people who came, they all said, this was the best 2 days that I ever spent, or 3 days, because I feel so much more refreshed and energized and focused and centered. And so that we need to kind of start thinking more about what, things that are, yes, it's important, it's not urgent. We need to make time for those things, because we'll have less fires to put out later on. So I think that's, kind of part of what you're talking about. And I think that this is an important aspect to focus on.
Yeah, absolutely. I 100% agree. I think shifting from those quadrants, right? And as Stephen Covey and others, they mentioned, right, the best organization, the best leaders really are operating on what's important, not urgent, right? They're always working on the things they're not trying to be in crisis mode all the time. They are trying to think about the things that are most important and setting their priorities and agendas to match those needs. What is, maybe you can give us an example of experiences you've had or things that you've seen. What does a robust leadership development look like in a nonprofit institution? I mean, in companies and organizations, they have all of these resources that they pump into upcoming talent and things of that sort. Yeah. What should organizations in the Muslim community be thinking about in terms of how to cultivate leaders in a better way, a more holistic way? What advice do you have on that?
Yeah, and of course, I like how you bring up the point that, there are corporations that do this, and they have positions and paid people who run leadership development programs and mentorships. And the question is always going to be a matter of resources when you're talking about, as we talked about, Muslim organizations are relatively new, right? So they're not as maybe well developed as some of the other even faith-based organizations out there. Of course, one thing that really helps is getting people to attend workshops that can kind of open their mind and help change the way that they think. One thing that this is a resource area, right? So it's hard to send all your people, but it's good to start thinking of sending not just the person who is the quote unquote leader, the person who is the title, but also other people who seem to be interested in developing themselves, right? And kind of pushing those people to do it. There's other tools that people can use also, like the LPI is what the Kouzes and Posner model uses, which is the leadership practices inventory of getting feedback. So you actually rate yourself on how often you think you engage in behaviors, and then you get feedback from managers, coworkers, and everyone else. That's huge, right? And having someone coach. Now that costs money, but it's money well spent. It's kind of like spending a little bit extra on your organic items, and maybe it costs more money to eat healthy, right? That's the challenge with eating healthy foods, but it pays off. Now, I kind of think that's one aspect. Now, some people might say, well, we have limited resources. It's hard for us to do that. Now, the kind of another aspect that doesn't cost money really is starting to change the culture of that organization, right? The mindset of that the leader does everything. You mentioned earlier the hypothetical leader who's busy putting out fires and he's the superstar. That
I don't think it's
doesn't work.
hypothetical, by the way.
It's not
It
hypothetical, yeah,
happens all
right.
the time.
We're not talking about an actual person, but it's an example that's lived out in not just schools but everywhere. Now, the challenge is that the organization really needs to think the leader should not think of themselves as the chief doer, right? That should not be the micromanager. One of those 5 practices that I was talking about, right, is that an effective leader, right, the exemplary leader enables other people to act. So they develop relationships with the people they have. They get to know them really well, and then they provide opportunities for them to grow. Now, opportunities to grow doesn't just mean going to that workshop for 3 days, and that can be a good start, but you need things to be sustainable and consistent. And one of those things that you can do, if you are an experienced leader, you can provide opportunities for people, teachers. You know what, teachers, what we need to do is I know that you guys have been calling and asking for more this, right? Whatever that particular program is, more after school help for our kids. Is there anyone out there who would be willing to kind of help me kind of get this started? I will give you the resources and you can kind of take this project. You'll be surprised, somebody's going to raise their hand. I'd like to do it. That's leadership right there. Someone's taking initiative. That's a teacher. That might be a teacher's assistant. That might be whoever. That person's taking initiative, and you go with it and you support them. And the leader has to invest time, right? And I know time is tough too, but that's something that if we're willing to do it, you're going to get more and more people confident to stick up. And then someone else is going to say, hey, I liked what Ahmed did with that program. I have an idea. And being receptive and open and letting people take on those challenges and guiding them through it. That's how you're going to develop that leadership confidence. Because leadership, yes, it's good to take that workshop. Those things are important, but you need ongoing opportunities to practice and guide people. I think if leaders can do that from the top, if the board has that mindset, the principal has that mindset, that goes throughout that whole organization. And it doesn't cost, $500,000 a year to do that.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, those are, the changing of mindset and creating a new culture and investing in your people. It doesn't really require, getting training, getting coaching, getting all those other things. It might, but you're absolutely right. I love that. Just that little shift that's needed. So I'd love to dive into those 5. So those are the 5 practices of exemplary leaders. I love the research. I mean, they've done decades of research in that book, The Leadership Challenge. Can you break those down for us? And more importantly, as you described them, how should they be implemented for leaders? Like, how do leaders implement these things? If you can give us a little breakdown of obviously what they are, but how are they actionable for leaders?
Sure. So, just a little bit about it. So the book, The Leadership Challenge, is by 2 authors you mentioned, Kouzes and Posner. They've done, since the 80s, right? So we're talking about 35 plus years of research. And how did they come across 5? They've boiled it down to 5 exemplary practices. What they did is they asked people when they were starting their research, tell me about a time when you were at your personal best as a leader. So people thought, and they gave a short narrative about, well, the best time was when I went into this company and the people were kind of fighting with each other and there was a lack of trust. And so I did this, and then this is what we accomplished. They gathered all those stories together and basically sorted them out and saw that there are really basically boils down to 5 things. The first is that an effective leader models the way. They have clear values, right? And they align their actions with what those values are. And then they set the example, right? They are the first example for everyone else. If you think about the example of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, clear on the values, very clear on always, never asking the Sahaba or other people to do things that he wasn't willing to do, always being the first in everything. So after that, you get inspiring a shared vision. So, an effective leader envisions the future and imagines something exciting. You can't be an effective leader by saying, we're just going to be, I don't know, not much different 5 years from now. It's going to be all right. No one is going to get excited by that. It's really what the authors talk about is that really leadership is about making people want to struggle. Like people want to struggle and they are willing to struggle if it's for something that is a shared aspiration. Think about why do people volunteer so much of their time at nonprofits, right? It's not for money. Right. People are primarily motivated by a sense that they're making a difference. So having that vision, inspiring a shared vision, though, it's not just the leaders. This is what I think. Everyone follow me. It's what do you think? Why do you work at this school? Why are you excited about participating in this after school program? And then really channeling that into a common vision. The third one is challenging the process. So it's looking for opportunities, seizing the initiative, looking outward. How are other people doing things, right? How can we do a better job? And taking risks. It's the small wins, right, is a big part of that. The fourth one, enabling others to act. I mentioned that earlier. It's fostering collaboration. It's strengthening others. And the fifth one is encouraging the heart, right? It's really taking a moment to recognize contributions and then to celebrate, those shared values. And what's interesting is in those stories, they found those, and then they started actually from those, they developed behavior that they started testing. So now in that LPI, the Leadership Practices Inventory, they now have of about 3 million people from all walks of life who've done this. And they're able to scientifically show that when a leader engages in certain behaviors, for example, sets a model, right? Acts as a model for others, or says thank you for a job well done. They actually can statistically show from these millions of, data samples that this is how much more engaged or how much more willing a person is to work hard, the more often that leader does it. So what's cool about this whole model is it's looking at leadership not as a title or a personality. It's like these are the behaviors, and there's charts that say if you do your frequency, if you do this just a little bit more often instead of occasionally, you did this most of the time, research shows that you have 30% more engagement from the people that you work with. So what's cool about it is it's really about becoming aware of these things. It's common sense for most of us, but then making it common practice, as some people say. So then actually making a commitment to developing yourself, practicing it, and getting feedback from others.
I love that. I mean, the framework is amazing. And it's been something I studied a while back and definitely learned so much for. And it's so important, particularly, I mean, I feel these concepts are really important generally, right? Maybe in a corporate structure, whatever it might be, but particularly in nonprofits, like particularly in work that is so difficult, that is really people centric. Like these practices and these frameworks are so important. We don't have time to dive into every single one of them, but I do want to ask you, which one do you feel has been the toughest for people to implement? So this is not like a scientific analysis,
Sure.
if you will, but William's perspective on which one is, whether it's through your facilitations or the work you've done with other orgs or your own organizations that you've led, what is the toughest one to work on and why?
Oh, great question. Well, I'll give a little bit of the scientific reason, but not too much depth. But the research shows in those 5 practices that inspiring a shared vision is usually the lowest for most leaders. People usually are more comfortable with encouraging the heart. I say thank you, right? I involve other people. I encourage them. Yeah, they get that. They get the idea that they should be, developing positive relationships with other people. That's clear. But when you get to the point of inspiring a shared vision, what ends up happening is that oftentimes when you look at younger age groups, you see people almost say, that's not my job. My job is not to come. That's the CEO's job. That's the head of the board. That's the principal's job to inspire a shared vision. The reality is that we all have these things that we know that we are passionate about. It's about learning how to communicate that. So when you go into workshops, it's one of those things that people tend to struggle with that a little bit more, because when you're sitting down in a workshop for 2 days on a Saturday, you never take the time normally to first talk about what are your values? Like, what do you care about? Like if I came up to most leaders, even experienced ones who haven't done a workshop like I experienced, because my answer would have been, my values are, I would have given you some sort of really basic lame answer that it wasn't really thought through. They're there, but I didn't have a chance to articulate it. So I think that's what people need to take the time to actually think about what they care about and then actually start to think about how they can put that into words to inspire other people. So I think that the more and more we take our youth, what's cool about the leadership challenge is that there's actually a student leadership challenge. All the same research, it's just the same practices, the behavior, the language is tweaked, and the stories that are in the book, which leadership challenge is all just about stories. They don't take the CEO, the rock star, or whatever. They take just average people who are doing regular jobs that people can connect with. But the students getting the student example are about college and high school kids who've done amazing things. If we can start with them and start to get them to think about leadership as, you have a vision, you have something, you can make a big change. I think that's one in general. And if to add another one really briefly, I think sometimes for some leaders and some organizations, I think enabling others can be a challenge for some, because oftentimes there is more of a thought of leadership as that top down, so that the leader comes up with a plan and tells people what to do, and everyone's kind of waiting to say, where should we go, boss? And you see that in corporations too. But I think that can be a challenge in some organizations where that's not been the culture. People are not willing to share their ideas because maybe in the past when they gave the idea, it was shut down and say, that's not going to work. No, it doesn't work in this school. No, it doesn't work in this organization. Or we've done that before and it didn't work. And then everyone becomes too deferential and you don't develop that culture of leadership.
Yeah, I love that. I like that you started with that one. I think you're absolutely right. People don't feel like their personal vision is a part of, like, oh, why am I? What's the leader that's supposed to have the vision? Why am I articulating a vision? So I really love that you brought that up. I think definitely everybody's creativity, everybody's values, as you mentioned, needs to come together for an organization to be truly dynamic. For it to really, like, everybody adds as much. There's tremendous buy-in when everybody feels like they're a stakeholder. I want to ask you about that. What happens when this concept of leadership becomes elitist? We've both been doing this for a long time, and particularly, I think, again, in the framework of our community, our institutions, people think of leader. It's weird. It's either, there's a sense of humility, like, oh, no, I'm not the leader. Yeah, no, I'm not the leader. So I don't know if it's that as much as a lot of times people see the word a leader as elitist, like it's them, it's those, it's they, and they separate themselves from the idea of leader. Can you tell people what is leadership, and how does everybody embrace this concept of leadership, or even those practices?
Yeah, so it's a deep one. How people perceive leaders can be as like this higher level thing that doesn't involve them. I think going back to some leadership research, it's really interesting when you go and you ask people, and this has been done with thousands of people through Kouzes and Posner and the different work that they've done. Who do you consider to be your number one leadership role model? And they have lists of people in there, and they have politicians and sports and athletes and all these different options that they can choose from. What goes up there as the very top position, the very top every time, with 18 to 30 and 30 plus, is family member. That's the person that they see as that they consider a family member to be their most inspirational leader. And it's really fascinating. It goes to that. And I saw that, for Oak Tree, you guys mentioned in your signature, it talks about the hadith, right? That all of you are a shepherd, right? And you're responsible for those that you lead. And leadership starts in the home, right? We don't think of that. We don't think of, they, who are they? Or if you think of leaders as a person with a capital L position, a CEO, principal, head of board, assistant principal, whatever it might be, then maybe it's they if you don't have a position like that. But the reality is that humans, that your children see you as the first person that they would think of as an exemplary leader. So if we can think about leadership as what a set of behaviors that we're all engaging in, then I think we can start to change that. And when you ask a room of people, like where you and I met in Florida, you do this activity and say, oh, how many of you are, leaders right now? And out of 200 people, you might get 30 hands, the principals. And then you give them that story and you give them that research and then say, okay, how many of you are leaders again? And you get every hand that comes up. How many of you are a parent? How many of you are okay, you're not a parent, fine. Are you a teacher? Yes, I am. You're a leader. There's 30 kids that look at you every single day and they are looking at you for guidance. They're wanting you to model things that you do. They want to be inspired. They want to be encouraged. You're a leader. So I think that's the first step in demystifying what leadership is changing how we perceive what a leader is or isn't.
Yeah, I love that. And at that point, everybody embraces. And I always say this as well. You don't want to embrace the title. You want to embrace the responsibilities, right? What does a leader do? What are you obligated to give, to do, to perform, to help, right? I think a lot of times, it's either some cultures are chasing the title because then it gives them the quote unquote authority, gives them the value, whatever it might be, or some people are just like very afraid of that and they don't want that quote unquote responsibility, not knowing that they are the leader and they're committed. They are the leader in their classroom. They are the leader for their sibling, whatever it might be, right? They are the leader for their family. So definitely embracing the habits and the behaviors more than the positions and the titles. I definitely love that, and I appreciate that. I'm gonna give you. I mean, we're wrapping up, and it's wonderful gems. I mean, really, really insightful wisdom and practices and things that people can really put into action. What is the if we so maybe like two more questions. What have you seen as the biggest I want to spin this in a positive context, but a lot of organizations that have really excelled at their leaders, like what have organizations done that have really cultivated a lot of good leadership other than just a culture? What is it that made some organizations really have good leaders? Did anything stand out to them that you've noticed, or maybe you've seen? Like, how do institutions actually do this? What does success look like for an organization that has good leaders?
Yeah, there's a lot of research that I think is interesting. We don't have a lot of time to go into it. Jim Collins, Good to Great, has talks a lot about these kind of leaders and these kind of organizations. The first book he had before that was called Built to Last, right? And he talks about those kind of organizations, and he does it in a fantastic way. I highly recommend Jim Collins and those two books. But really, one of the things we've touched on already is that they think about leadership as a culture of leadership. They don't think of it as just this one person. It's as soon as the CEO or the next person comes up, they're already in the active process of figuring out what is the pool of people that we can groom to assume this. And they don't do it just by saying, you're going to do this and then give them their regular jobs. They involve them more and more in higher levels of responsibility, and they guide them in that path. So I think that's a huge part about it. I think it's just really a difference in investing in what is important but not urgent, because those things are, this principal's probably going to be here 3 to 5 years, right, on average. Well, it's their second year, we're fine. We'll worry about that when we get the notice, all right? And oftentimes, because the culture is not really put into place and you don't have that collaborative relationship, that people end up leaving without a notice, and then you end up having this vacuum, and you just kind of keep bringing in any person to fill that position without really trying to develop from within. And that's oftentimes you have those conversations with different people who are looking for leaders, and they say, well, we're trying to hire someone nationally. And the question is, have you started by looking from in your school yet? It's like, no. And if you haven't thought about it, then it's probably a little late to start now to just bring up any person and say, you want to be a leader? Okay. And bring them up. They may not be primed for success that way, but it's starting to think ahead. If you experience that, think if you have a principal or a leader or any place, you involve that principal, because I think principals, to refer back to Jim Collins, he talks about these different levels of leaders, right? And I think he refers to it as like a level 4 leader, I think is like the highest, or it's level 5. I can't remember what he refers to it as, but it's essentially, you want to develop an organization that creates leaders that are the kind of people that they don't do the work that they're doing to get the personal acclaim. They're not doing it to say, right? Because a step below, you could have really high leaders that get results, but if by leaving, they might say, well, when I leave, this place is going to drop behind me. Watch, because I was so important. Islamically, we know, man rafa lillahi, right? Man tawada lillahi rafa, right? Whoever is humble for the sake of Allah, he will raise him. So we need those humble servant leaders, those people who see it as like, I am doing this for the sake of Allah. I'm doing it for the kids in this organization, or the community. And you really want to have that high level leader who's essentially saying, I want to come back to this organization 5 years from now and find it bigger and better and more developed than when I was there. And if you can get that mentality, if we can start developing that in our boards and in our schools, then they're going to naturally, if my motivation in leaving a school is to come back 5 years later and find it double the enrollment than when I was there, what do you think I'm going to do? Right? Do you think I'm
happy? Absolutely.
I'm gonna work
ecstatic?
Yeah, I'm going to be happy. I'm going to be ecstatic, and I'm also going to try to develop people to take that on. Right? I'm going to give that responsibility. I'm going to think about it. So I think that's trying to, it's to get that mentality of in schools. I think it takes time and patience and the support of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
I love it. I love it. Yeah, absolutely. I love that litmus test of if you come back to an organization you work with, are they better? How do you feel about that? Did you try to put them in the right place? I think that's so crucial. That genuineness, that ikhlas, the sincerity, the fact that you're really serving for a cause and not yourself. I think it's tough, right? Your egos get in the way, and things, wanting fame, wanting to be acclaimed, kind of have this spotlight. I think it's really tough, but I love the way you mention it. I want to end you out. This is one of the questions I always ask, particularly our leadership experts. If there's one advice you have for community leaders on the ground, people day in and day out serving our community, whether educational institutions or community-based institutions or whatever it might be, what is the one advice you would give if you had a khutbah that you can give to leaders?
The one. That's a good one. That's tough. I guess the simplest one I could give right now is don't stop learning. Don't stop trying to grow. And I think that connects back to the second. If I were to cheat and pull a second one in there, is connect your niyyah, right? What is your niyyah all the time? Your intention on doing this. Your intention is to help. Your intention is to please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Your intention is to benefit kids or community or wherever it is that you're working. So check that niyyah and realize that in order for us to really make a big impact, we're going to have to keep developing ourselves constantly. We need to keep reading. We need to keep thinking. We need to go to as many different, expose ourselves to new ideas and to be humble. Because in order for you to grow, it requires being open to feedback. And that's tough, especially when you're new in leadership, right? You're not as confident, so you may not want to hear that you're not doing something well. Well, you need to hear it. You need to find people who can give you that guidance in a supportive way. And if you have that, you're going to have to keep learning, growing, reading. And that's what the authors say, in Kuzes and Posner, they both mention, the best leaders are the best learners. So I think if we all keep learning, and I think as Muslims, right? I mean, the Quran starts off with Iqra, right? And it's read, learn, seek knowledge. And I think that's what's going to lead us to the next level, inshallah.
I love it. That's wonderful advice. And I ask Elijah to allow us to embody and embrace it and definitely always constantly think about how we can continue to grow and learn and develop ourselves. I want to get you out by just where can people connect with you? I know you're with the Council of Islamic Schools in America, North America, CISNA. How can people connect with you? Where can people follow you and any of the work that you're doing?
Yeah, so you can check out on the CISNA website. If you type in CISNA, Council of Islamic Schools in North America, you'll find our website. And on that website, we often have, we've been doing a lot of webinars, especially since the pandemic started. So in any educational issues, we've also done, I've done some co-hosted or presented about some of these topics that we are talking about. So that's one way you can get connected. I'm also in LinkedIn. So if you type in William White, if you type in Louisville, Kentucky, or Leadership Challenge, any of those things, you'll likely to find me there. Be happy to reach out to me and connect. I like to work with other people, and I really want to give my whole motivation in doing any sort of leadership consulting thing is really because I want to bring this to other people, right? I want to bring those connections that I made to others. And, I can think of it as an opportunity for Sadaqa Jariyah, right? If you can develop someone who changes their mind, who makes more of an impact, then inshallah, the ajr, inshallah, will come back to all of us.
Absolutely. We ask Elijah to allow that to allow you to accept from you and allow that to allow you to continue to build and develop and nurture leaders in our community and for our society, our country, the world. We ask Allah to accept from you. We'll definitely leave that information in the show notes and in the description so people can connect with you. Very, very honored, very humbled. Jazakallah khair for your time. And we hope and pray that Allah continues to allow us and those around us to build and develop into the leaders that Allah expects of us to be, and hopefully we can meet Him as such. Jazakallah khair, everybody, for listening for another episode of the Oak Street Institute podcast. Inshallah ta'ala, until the next one, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.